which is the story of the creation of emerging new wholes with new properties. The trick is to discover what new things are created by that moreness that arises out over and above the addition of just the parts. If you think of all the atoms that make us up, billions and billions and billions, trillions of cells, and billions and billions and billions of atoms, and we know that if we were all boiled down into a little pile of carbon, a little pile of, a little bag of oxygen, and I couldn't say a pile, a little bag of nitrogen, and a little bag of hydrogen, which are all gases. It's sort of a disturbing thought to know that we're made out of so much gas. But if you took all that and sold it somewhere, I think today it wouldn't be worth more than $3. And yet it has been put together in such an extraordinary way. See, if you took all that gas and that carbon and shook it up like a shake and bake sack, what do you think you'd get? You wouldn't get much of anything. But when it's put together in a certain way, it makes a new whole. And just look at what qualities that are more than the sum of the parts of all that you get. Make up a thinking, feeling, hoping, breathing, active, productive human being. Now, it's our thesis in the Anisa project that the new educational system of the future has got to address the emergent properties, qualities of man evolving, and that the curriculum must address it. The teachers must deal with it, and that administrators must acknowledge it. And they're just marvelous new things emerging. And in fact, anybody who has a baby has the excitement of seeing that. That's why it is so thrilling to have a baby, most of the time. There's a diapers, there's a crying at 2 a.m., a few things like that, but even so, it's a magnificent experience. It's so magnificent that every time you see your child, you just have this kind of upwelling of wonderful feeling, especially before they've reached puberty. After that, you may change your mind a little bit for other reasons. I have a daughter who's reached puberty, you could tell. So that the mechanistic view is static, it's parts-oriented, it's objective, whereas the organismic view deals with processing, time, it's concerned with wholes, with relationships, with synthesis, and it honors subjectivity. Now, it's going to be my thesis that one of the emergent properties of evolution that created man was to enable man to be conscious. That consciousness itself is a product of evolution. And the interesting thing about consciousness is that it enables you not only to know things, but it enables you to know that you know, which also makes you aware when you don't know, and makes you very sensitive to unknowns. Sensitivity to unknowns is called curiosity, and it's one of the motivating forces to find out. And it's one of the most precious commodities we have in education. And children come naturally endowed with it, though sometimes we kind of beat it out of them. So if you can keep those two contexts in your mind, then the one that deals with the philosophical shift from mechanistic to organismic, and the one of science and evolution, then I'm going to talk about what these emergent properties were and how Anisa proposes to, in a rough way, deal with that. Are there any pressing questions about any of those basic notions? I know there are 20 million questions that maybe aren't so pressing. Coffee may be more pressing, that's why I said pressing, so that you can differentiate. Well, let me say one final thing, then we'll have coffee. If you examine carefully how evolution proceeds, you will see it proceeded in each case by a process of differentiation of cells and their integration into new units, which were then differentiated from other units and integrated into a higher whole. So that the story of evolution itself, on the physical, biological levels, is one of differentiation and integration. It is therefore not surprising that the apex at the emerging highest pinnacle in the product of evolution, the human brain, should perform functions called learning that can be understood in terms of differentiation and integration. That's why we feel we have struck a first principle, and that exploring that intensely over the next several thousand years will yield for us a harvest of understanding about human growth and development, which will enable us perpetually to improve education as a profession and help us perpetually to improve the role of parents and the function of parents as they try to raise children and bring forth new generations. That's all for now. Let's have a cup of coffee and we'll come back right at 4. One other point about the difference between mechanistic and organismic. Because both of those words in ISTIC or IC, you may find them confusing. Well, here's the way I look at it. Mechanistic kind of means mechanical, and I always think of mechanical things as being dead, whereas organismic things are like living organs, and they're alive. And that might help separate the two a little bit in your minds. One of the major shifts in thinking from mechanistic to organismic has to do with the understanding of cause and effect relationships. And this is one of the tough ones for physics to deal with. But modern science, Western science, has, for all practical intents and purposes, accepted only one kind of cause, which Aristotle called efficient cause. And that's the mechanical or the material cause. If you ask an ordinary Western scientist, what made this felt tip pen go through the air like that? They would say, well, Dan Jordan's arm picked it up and moved it. It surely didn't go by itself. We saw it, his hand did it. Now, the organismic philosophers went one step further. And they said, why did Dan Jordan's hand move that? And you see, the only way you can find out about that is to ask me. And I will give you the purpose behind my act, which was to explain the difference between efficient and final causation. So the organismic thinking takes into account final causation, which is purpose. You see, if I had not had in my mind the purpose of explaining the difference between these two kinds of causation, that pen would not have moved from the top of this podium. And therefore, the purpose, which is the final cause, was actually prior to the efficient cause, which is my actual hand moving it. Now, of course, supposing I did this just by accident, well, it's not too much to, in that case, to talk very much about final causation, because I didn't have any purpose at all. It was an accident. Now, the idea of purpose is very prominent in understanding higher forms of being. And as a matter of fact, you will not be able to understand the behavior of your children if you don't understand what purpose they have in mind. And that may be a little bit difficult because they may not be able to explain what purpose they have in mind exactly, even though they have one. And in fact, not bothering to inquire what the child's purpose is in doing whatever he's doing is a flaw in any diagnostic procedure, which must precede a prescription. You've got to have the understanding first. And it's amazing, in my observing myself as a parent, how many times we just presume there's no worthwhile purpose there at all, and we just move in and say how we want it done, period. And we usually say, what in the world are you doing, rather than, why are you doing what you're doing? And I remember when it suddenly dawned on me that I should use the Anisa thesis in teaching my own child to play the piano, that it might be useful. And it occurred to me simply because my little Sarah was having such a rough time. The notes on the scale, on the written staff, were going up, and she would play down. So I'd say, can you see that these notes are going up? Well, she had this puzzled look on her face. And she said, yes, I can see they're going up. This one is lower than that one. All fine. I said, then why don't you make the sounds go up? Why do you go down? She said, well, I don't think they're going down. So finally she said in great frustration, if you want the notes to go up, we have to put something under this leg of the piano. She was not differentiating between two kinds of upness. I was talking about going up in pitch. She thought up was up, which was higher than down. The funny thing was, I was once working with her with the manuscript, the musical manuscript. I took it off the stand and put it flat. Guess what? The scale went northeast. It didn't go up anymore. It only goes up. The music is like this. This is higher than that. This is closer to the earth. This is higher than the earth. But when you turn it this way, they are both as close to the earth or the surface of the table as each other, and therefore it didn't go up at all. It just went off to the right. Now, you see, we must have worked for 3 weeks, fussing and screaming and hollering and so on, trying to get this sorted out. When I finally said to myself, for heaven's sakes, this child is not differentiating somewhere, or she's integrating something that I don't see. And she's getting things confused, which is what an unanticipated integration is. I bumped into many things like that with her. She had very narrow, undifferentiated views of most definitions. And when I said up, I meant higher pitch, and by higher pitch, I meant higher frequencies. And eventually she began to understand that up and higher have far more meanings than just being up off the ground, you see. And once I clarified that, she was able to proceed. So, when you start applying this new view of things, it reveals to you, in working with children, lots of things that you wouldn't ordinarily bump into. And certainly one of the important things about a child is that he will have lots of purposes. And one of the important qualities of a good teacher is to invite, in a very inviting way, the child to adopt your purpose for a given learning task as his purpose or her purpose. Once they take that on, then of course you just sail. And that's why the quality of the relationship between the teacher and the child is so important, because a child is very likely to adopt your suggestion as his own, take your purpose as his purpose, if the relationship is good, and he's not likely to if the relationship is bad. And later we're going to be talking about what we mean by a relationship in some detail. George, you want to add anything to that business of efficient cause and final cause?
That leap in evolution that came about with purpose.
Well, yes, George is talking about where purpose emerges in the course of evolution. You have an enormous leap forward, and especially when you have a sense of purpose arising out of consciousness, where purpose becomes conscious intention to do something. And in fact, that's really what a lot of the development of the prefrontal lobes was about. And that's why volition and will become very important subjective counterparts of purpose. And when you cut off the prefrontal lobes, then you have some problems. On Monday, when I was talking about volitional competence, I didn't go into it very much, but the human brain this part, which is up front, here's the guy, here's his eyes, and here's his nose, and here's his... This part up front is called the telencephalon, curiously enough. T-E-L comes from a Greek word that means, well, it's a combination of meanings, but we get it in such words as teleology, which means purpose. And it has to do with the extension of something beyond where it is, and also refers to the idea from afar. So we get it in telephone, which is hearing from afar, telegraph, which is writing from afar, telegram, which is a letter from afar, or telepathy, which means feeling from afar, or whatever. So that the minute final cause came into being and purpose then became a part of evolution, it took off in new turns. And with man today, it's particularly relevant because we know enough about the means of evolution that we can now begin to control our own evolution. That's what recombinant DNA research is in part all about. And we can alter our own environments such that the selection pressures upon us are altered. And the issues that we have with diseases we can't conquer, particularly cancer and so on, are all manifestations of evolutionary forces still impinging upon us. And you will never be able to look at any disease and its cure apart from the genetic disposition of the individual. Some are more likely to get certain things than others. And those that die early because of whatever it is will not be around to reproduce as much. And eventually there will be fewer people with that until over 100 million years or so they might be extinct. In the meantime, though, don't forget these little viruses are evolving. There are new forms of those. And they're getting smarter. They hide in more secret places and find ways of getting into you. And the cockroach, which is one of the most ancient of creatures, has incredible survival skills, including black flag and God knows what all that you want to spray on them, you know. They sort of turn over and look groggy for a while, but pretty soon, you know, here comes a third generation that drinks it like milk. And now you have to find something else because they have genetic mutations that enable them to cope with that and go on with something else. So we are in a peculiar position, though, and that is that there have been two models of evolution, really. One dealing with the production of massive numbers where you know you're going to lose 95%. And the remaining 5% are going to be refined, and they will lay millions of eggs, and you'll have amassed more. And that's the way insects and spiders and so on do. They have millions of offspring, and you know 85% of them aren't going to make it. But enough will make it to carry the whole species forward. But in mammals, largely because mammalian life emerged in the trees, you can't look after more than one because your arms have got to be free to hang onto the limbs. So you jump down from having a lot to having just one. Well, once you only got one, I mean, that could be the end of the chain if you lose that one. So along with it developed instincts for caring, for nurturing, and so on, that are characteristic or should be characteristic of the human species. And so you have to look after that one, and you have to, and the troubles don't end just with puberty either, I'm told. They get married and they still have troubles. You have to go on looking after them until you die, unless they precede you. We have to look after each other, that's the point. Well, let me jump now to a discussion of some of these emergent properties which Anisa holds to be incredibly important as we look at ourselves as emergent creatures on this tiny planet around this very medium-sized sun in a very, what looks to be less than ordinary solar system, in one of the smaller galaxies among the billions of galaxies with the billions of stars in them that make up this universe. First of all, evolution is the historical expression of creativity. Just as learning is the expression of personal creativity in a growing human being. Whitehead says there are two basic forces in the universe. One is the winding down, which is expressed in the second law of thermonuclear dynamics. See, the sun is getting dimmer, it's getting colder. Incidentally, in 1950, we began a new ice age. I don't know whether you all were aware of that, but we have. And if past cycles and ice ages are an indication, and these have been pretty well plotted now through geological evidence and carbon dating and so on, that Suffield will be covered with snow year-round. Or these 5 cities, as part of Project Inspire, will be covered with snow year-round. And of course, this is not going to happen right away, but we've seen a few evidences of it already. And chances are it won't, the overall average temperature of the winters aren't going to decrease more than, say, 10 or 15 degrees. But you see, that's enough to create an ice sheet on the polar caps that will extend down into the temperate zones. And that's going to create all kinds of requirements of adaptability, like finding new energy sources and so on. That's why we have to get this model going, so we have all these competent learners coming along so we can discover these new sources of energy. I myself think that there is energy in simply gravitational pull. There has to be. Otherwise, how could it pull my arm down? It represents a force. And I think we're going to find out what it is, such that we can just can it and use it to cook our tea or whatever. Because so far, almost any form of energy has been convertible into another form. But it's going to take some inquiring minds to do that. And my own projection for an Anisa University, a few years ago I was invited to extrapolate a little bit what Anisa would look like carried into the university. And my idea is that the universities of the future will always be tied in to a collective effort among the scholars assembled to work on some of the pressing problems facing us. In fact, I've, over the last 2 years, made a list of the 1,000 most pressing problems facing mankind. With a 3x5 card, I put the problem, where it's located in the world, how many people it has affected, what kind of knowledge is required to lick it, about how much time it will take to lick it, and what kind of resources will be required. Because I think the curriculum of the future is going to have to be centered on that. Just to give you an example of energy and gravity, which is taking a secondary expression of gravity and converting the energy from that rather than the primary expression. This moon pulls billions of tons of water around twice a day, which make up the tides. Now, if we built massive offshore turbines, dams with turbines in them, the moon would pull the ocean through those turbines, and turn around and pull the ocean back through them. And there would be no pollution whatever. And you would be harnessing, indirectly, the gravitational pull of the moon through its capacity to move billions of tons of water. And you would have enough electricity to illumine the whole world. Now, I would see major universities in the engineering departments and the electrical departments who would now have an integrated overview of how everything is connected, would get together and design the first set of experimental offshore dams and get them hooked up and working. As it is now, so many people in graduate school feel useless. But they wouldn't feel so useless if they had an offshore dam at the end. Then their degree would really mean something. And you could put a little plaque there and say, these 900 doctoral students helped build this dam and design it and so on. And the undergraduates could get out there and, you know, watch what's going on, and you'd have a hands-on experience. It'd make learning come alive. The world is filled with incredible things to be done, and to have people stuck in classrooms all the time. I'm saying some of the time, but not all the time, you see. Think what could be done, and think how many people would love it. You see, it would really make it alive in a new way. Now, that digression had a point to it when I started the digression. Now, whoever was following my train of thought, would you mind telling me what my point was? Go back to your nose 2 sentences. It'll come to me on the plane tonight, and I'll write you a note. Well, in any case, the point is well taken, because our basic thesis here is that we want to make knowledge not inert. We want to translate it into patterns of action. And here we can do that. And this would be an incredible expression of creativity and evolution itself. Now, I want to talk a little bit now about consciousness, because this is one of the most prominent emergent qualities, that more that came about, which was equal to that was more than the addition of the parts when you sum them up. Consciousness apparently became a possibility when symbolization became a possibility. To symbolize means to be able to let one thing stand for something else, so that you can retain it in your mind when that something else is not present. You see, if every time we wanted to talk about a horse we had to trot one in, it would make the curriculum very cumbersome. You just think, every sentence would have 27 things in it, you'd have to haul them in. No, we let a certain sound stand for that thing. So we can talk about millions of things without ever seeing the actual things. In fact, a lot of the learning of a child is simply hooking up, or the creation of a complex network of symbols that refer to experiences and things that are happening to them. And man got so incredible that he was able to even allow something to stand for another something, which stands for another something, which refers to something he's not even sure about yet. And mathematics was one complex symbol system that emerged that enables him to do that. Here we have this sound, 5. And then we converted another symbol so we could see it, so it has a visual counterpart. And what does that 5 mean? It means a quality, in the case of number, that you can't even weigh or burn or tear up or pound into a new shape. If you have 5 elephants, as I was talking about the other day, and 5 peanuts, they both share something in common. It's 5-ness. Now, where is that? You can't weigh it, you can't burn it, you can't toss it around, it won't bounce. It doesn't seem to be anywhere. And yet we have a symbol to stand for it, and we can use it in a million ways. And it has enabled us to penetrate extraordinary mysteries of the universe. That's why math is so magnificent, and why people who are poor at math miss out on a magnificent part of experience. So I had my first whole life in music and in the arts, and when I came back to start over in the sciences, and I took my first statistics course, it was just a shocker. You know, I realized that that part of existence had never penetrated very far to me. And I had to hire a tutor, you know, and we had to derive the formula for analysis of variance and God knows what all. And I realized by the internal trauma I was experiencing with this math instructor up there spinning out these formulae, and looked around and saw quite a few others having the same trauma, that we kind of condition ourselves into it, and that led to my deep interest in finding out how to avoid all that, because I just tune out, my mind goes blank when somebody gets to the blackboard and says x minus y over 2 to the 10th power. It's easy. When anybody does that, I find that the frontal lobes close down, the cerebral cortex involutes, and I go off into a stupor of some kind. And I'm sure hundreds of people do that. You just can't follow. See, I have to know what each one of those symbols stands for, and I have to drag all that it means along with it. Whereas a good mathematician leaves all the baggage behind. They just manipulate all the stuff up here, and then when they come out at the end, they add all the baggage to it. I have to drag all the baggage of every symbol all the way through. See, and of course, it takes 6 hours to do one little problem that way. But it takes certain structures, certain experiences, before you can manipulate those symbols like that and know what it means when they come out the other end, you see. But my point is that there would be no way to know that you know, which is one of the prime qualities of consciousness, if you didn't have a symbol to store that by. So you not only have a symbol that represents the knowledge you know, but you have another symbol that tells you that you know it. That's why when you forget it, you know you've forgotten it. See, the worst person is in a terrible position when he doesn't even know what he's forgotten. Of course, he's probably happier in some ways, too, because knowing how much you forget every day is very worrisome. But nonetheless, it does tend to keep us on our toes a little bit if we are aware of that. That's why symbolization and how it takes place in children is very important for us. And incidentally, you will find many learning problems centering precisely around that. The inability to allow the symbol to stand for something else. And you will find many problems and confusions and misunderstandings coming from the fact that they are allowing the same thing to stand for lots of things, or they have too many different things standing for the same thing. And there will be a lack of differentiation in the right place and a lack of integration in the right place, and therefore they won't come out with what you expect them to come out with when they analyze a problem or when they're doing whatever they're doing. And one of the things that we're going to talk about later on in the 3 years is going to be the implications of Anisa theory of pedagogy for giving directions to a child. Because some children do not pick up giving directions and following directions easily. They just don't get them. And many teachers don't know how to give them. In fact, have you ever taken one of these ditto sheets that comes home with your kid from school that's so light you can hardly read it yourself? And there's a little direction at the top to do something. And you try to make rhyme or reason out of it, and you realize if you were in kindergarten again, you may flunk, because the directions are so unclear. I really feel that sometimes half of the score that a kid doesn't get is probably hidden, or the reason for him not getting a decent score is hidden in the fact that the directions given were either ambiguous, misleading, unclear, contradictory, or whatever, some combination thereof. There is an art to giving clear directions, and in any case, whatever directions are given must be given in terms, say symbols, known to the child. And if they're not, then of course he won't know what to do. And when he doesn't know what to do, and he's forced to do it anyway, he'll be frustrated. That means an emotional flooding, which means concentration will be impossible, which means the performance will go down, and then he will get nervous because he'll see everybody passing him up. Pretty soon he will develop a habitual response to that circumstance, and now you have learning disability. It happens all the time. And we drag them into adulthood. You have them and I have them. There are certain things that when we get to them, we've learned now how to politely avoid a lot of things. But a kid often doesn't have that option, you see, because we say you got to do it. So he just has to kind of live through it. It's a wonder we make it sometimes. Well, One of the other byproducts of consciousness is our ability, through symbolization, to store history through memory. And that is a capacity which we call immanence. I-M-M-A-N-E-N-C-E. It simply, immanence literally means indwellingness, and for us it means indwellingness of the past. Whatever you've gone through gets stored. And I don't know if we'll have a chance for a memory seminar during the 3 years. We probably will, in which we'll talk about and summarize what is known about human memory, but there are new discoveries being made all along about how it works. And for a long time they hunted around for that little unit of information that got stored somewhere, and they never could find it. You know, they thought, well, if your memory of your mother is stored right here and you drilled a hole there and scooped that part out, then she'd be completely forgotten. But it's not true. Mother seems to be stored everywhere in the cortex. And you can scoop out large parts of the brain and you still seem to remember nearly everything. Have you ever seen live brain? It's most extraordinary, gelatinous, gray, pinkish matter. It's the most precious substance in the universe. And it's taken 4.5 billion years to refine it and to make it. It takes 9 months in the womb to make a single one. And you're born with a pretty nearly complete brain. Toes and legs and everything else grows, but the brain, that's why the child's head is proportionately larger than the rest of the body. If the head grew at the same rate as the toe did, you'd have a head this big by the time you're an adult. But that's because most of the brain is organized and developed prenatally, and only a certain percentage postnatally. And mostly it's insulating the nerve fibers and so on. So this brain is marvelous. And the always interesting thing that I found when I was cutting up all those brains, and we had to decorticate live cats and stick little wires in the brain and make the cat's whisker move and the tail wag and so on, because they're in the motor cortex of the cat, there are definite connections between specific nerves in, say, the tail and whatever. And the thing that struck me in all that was that the brain itself is not able to interpret what is happening to itself. It can only interpret what's happening to everything else, so that it can feel no pain. So when you do brain surgery, the patient is always, you just have a local anesthetic to get through the scalp. But once you do the brain, it doesn't feel anything. You can take a spoon and just scoop out a nice part. And if that's the part your mother's in, well, there she is. It's just extraordinary stuff. You got 12.5 billion cerebral neurons, and each one of those is supported by 12 or 15 other cells. It's just mind-boggling what's been packed in there. And you know the brain is highly convoluted. In earlier mammals, the brain is smooth. But as man evolved, that outer layer, cortex, which means bark, the outer layer of it, became so developed it needed more room, and yet the skull didn't get bigger. So what it did, it just folded up like this. You know, if you have a long strip of cloth and you want to get it in a bottle, it won't go straight in, so when you keep pushing it in, it just goes like this. If you could take the outer bark of the brain, it would stretch out maybe 6 or 7 feet, because it just goes like this, and that's why it looks wrinkled, because it's going like this all over the edge, because it's been crammed inside the cranium. And in fact, they say that the amount of convolution of a brain shows evolutionary advancement, and there's only one creature that has an equally or slightly more convoluted brain. Do you know what it is? Dolphins. And they say the only reason dolphins are not at the apex of evolution is they never developed hands. So they could not become tool users. But yet communication and all these things, they seem to be very advanced creatures. So that's why the Navy is studying them. You know, the Navy puts a lot of money into trying to understand the dolphins. They'll win the war later, but not to understand the dolphins. The ability then, by consciousness and symbols, to accumulate the past means we can pass on through these same symbols to our youngsters our experience, so that your and my experience is not limited to just the life we lived, but can entail and touch upon the lives of millions of others. And once we got the idea that we could store these sounds, words, in the form of symbols and make books and scrolls, and of course you can see what an incredible thing it is, and that's why reading has got to be, at least at this point in time, a critical factor in the evolution of humanity, and that's why there's such tension about it, because it opens up a million windows onto the lives of millions of others once you can read. And you can share the thoughts of somebody like Plato, who was here 2,300 years ago, once you can read. Now you see, when you think of your life, if you couldn't read and you couldn't share the thoughts of others, how bleak your life would be. But because you've got television and you've got books and you can read and you can hear other people talk and so on, your life is 1,000 times richer in terms of just the diversity of experience as your predecessor. And this is going to go on and on and on. That's why we say there's no limit to the evolution and potential of man, because it's just going to go on indefinitely. Now, because we can store the past, we can bring all of that knowledge to bear on the present. And because we remember that every night the sun goes down and every night it comes up, we got into the idea of predicting that it will happen tomorrow. So now we plan on it. And we begin stretching things into the future. Now, along with stretching things into the future, we began to project possibilities of what we might be, or what society might be. We formed ideals, and they became guideposts. They became lures. So one of the emergent qualities of man is an ideal maker and an ideal follower, a follower of ideals. Once you begin organizing patterns of energy around those ideals, values are created. So emergent quality of man is a creature who has values. There are patterns to the way he uses his energies, and he can, through learning, have a deliberate say in what those values will be, and that he is purposeful. Human beings are purposeful. They respond to purpose. And incidentally, that's what makes medicine so complicated, because Western medicine is based entirely on the mechanistic model. And yet, if you believe that this pill, which is just sugar water, will help you, chances are it will. This is why there's such a big trouble over the Laetrile thing. See, when the government does its experiments, it does a double-blind placebo study, which simply means you take 500 people who have cancer, you separate them into two groups of 250 each. You give these 250 Laetrile, but they don't know they're getting Laetrile, and the attending physician doesn't know they're getting Laetrile, and these people over here just get a placebo, which is a phony pill, just sugar water, say. But they don't know it's sugar water, and the physician doesn't know. Only somebody else knows. Now, when you do that, there is no difference in the remission of cancerous tumors from the two groups. And the government always only believes, because they have the mechanistic model, in double-blind placebo studies. However, if you take the same 500 people and you say, how many of you here believe that Laetrile will cure your cancer. Say you get 250 people to raise their hand. You take those 250 people, you give them Laetrile, and you tell them it's Laetrile, and they are attended by physicians who believe in Laetrile, and you give the other group the sugar pill. They're the group that doesn't believe in Laetrile anyway. Then you get tumors disappearing in this group. That's because one of the primary emergent properties in evolution is that the matter, the chemicals that made up our brains, created mind as an emergent property. And mind, once it was created, turned around and now pushes the chemistry. And that's what Western medicine is reluctant to accept. And yet, let's face it, if I tell you, I just heard that your son passed away or your mother passed away, even if it's a lie, but if you believe it, what does it do to the chemistry of you? First of all, your adrenal glands will release adrenaline. Your heart rate will increase. Tears will flow from your eyes, and the liver will give up glucose. And the blood vessels in your arms and legs will be dilated. Just those words of my saying, those symbols, which refer to something else, which if you believe it, can push all that chemistry around in that way. So man is a believer. Now, the big problem we have is getting into difficulty when we believe in something that is not true. And that's where the big sorting out is going to have to be in the next 100 years, in my opinion, with Western medicine, is because we know that belief in something that will heal you increases very highly the probability that it will help. And disbelief in it decreases the probability that it will help. And it varies from individual to individual. Now, I want to jump down to number 4 for just a minute and talk about those relationships among belief, truth, actuality, and behavior, because these relationships are very important for us. Truth, for us in the Anisa-Model, means a relationship between an appearance and whatever reality underlies it. The more there, so if it's a one-to-one relationship, then the truth relationship is 0.1 or 1 point. What you see is what you got. Don't confuse truth with reality. Reality is simply, well, don't confuse truth with actuality. Actuality is simply whatever is. But we can never get to that exactly. See, how can I get in there? I can't see all these atoms that make up this wood. I don't know what the structure looks like. They're vibrating and jumping around in there. They're giving off, they're evaporating into the air, you know. That's why this wood is aging. That's why if we leave it sitting here for 10,000 years, it'll be probably in a little pile. All the material that's sitting around there, a lot of it is evaporating. Those ions are coming off. That material is going to disintegrate if it just sits here, because it's busy. I tell you, if you look at under an electron microscope, that stuff you're sitting on is jumping around. I was never so shocked in my life as when I looked at a drop of distilled water under an electron microscope. Sterile distilled water. Boy, it was jumping with things. I mean, it was just like this. Hundreds of little things of different shapes just darting around all over the place, and none of them were alive. It was simply the electrical charges among them were just causing them to bounce around. Well, this just looks like brown stained wood to me. That's the appearance. But is that the truth of the wood? Or is that the reality of the wood? That's why we needed a microscope, to give us a new appearance which was closer to the reality, or the actuality. Now, the difference between actuality and reality is that actual things have substance. and they are real. But some real things do not have substance, like an idea. We would be foolish to deny the reality of an idea, because we see it has effects, even. But ideas are not actual. They cannot be weighed, they can't be burned, they can't be cut in half, or they can't be bent into a new shape. When I give you an idea, where is it? But to say it doesn't have reality would be crazy. So all actuality, stuff like that, has reality. But not all real things are actual. And the truth of something simply refers to the relationship between its appearance and what underlies it. And some things are deceptive. Now, that's why we have to make a decision about it, and that decision represents admission to belief. And our behavior flows from the belief. So now, if you believe in something which in fact is false, it will ordinarily get you into trouble. But there's that case then that's so befuddling to physicians today. If you believe in Laetrile, which they think is a false cure of cancer, it may in fact lead to a remission of your tumor. Of course, something other than Laetrile would too if you believed in it. But that's because the power of thought can push around the chemistry. And I don't know why we're so slow to recognize it, because we know through hypnosis that you can do all kinds of things. You could even through hypnosis make all the blood flow out of one arm into the other. So we know the power of the mind is really extraordinary. It does have power over the body. However, the Anisa curriculum is structured so that there is a constant sensitivity to discrepancies between appearances and the things that they refer to, so that there is a passion to get the correspondence between, or the appearance between something and what it underlies it to be as close as possible, so that the truth content is as high as possible. Otherwise, you have superstition. And when you behave on the basis of superstition, you are to a certain degree out of touch with the reality of something. And when you're out of touch with the reality of something, you cannot deal with it effectively or competently. And we'll later have a chance to talk about it in more detail about what that means. So there is a relationship between belief, truth, actuality, reality, and behavior. Now, where do ideals come in? They are projections of possible actualities. They are dealing in the realm of potentiality. And they, too, determine human behavior. An ideal is a non-actual reality. When you say, so-and-so's my ideal, where is that? It has reality, it has effects, it determines behavior, and it's very important in education. But you see, the mechanistic notion of interpretation of things deals almost entirely with actuality. And they believe that actual things are the only real things. This is what Whitehead says is one of the great departures. And then Einstein came along and said, even this, if you could move it at the speed of light squared, would turn into pure energy. So we know that ultimately there's only one reality, and it has two forms, energy or matter. And it goes back and forth. And understanding how you can make it go back and forth, of course, is going to open up many new possibilities. Well, there are some other things that have emerged. I just want to summarize them quickly. And you've got to deal with them if you're going to work with human beings. That business of ideals is what keeps us reaching. That we refer to as transcendence. It means the ability to perpetually go beyond where you are now. We want to know how everything is related. We do. That's why we are meaning-bearing creatures. We got to have it. Therefore, if you tell your student, do it because I said so, when he doesn't understand the order or the why of it, it won't have any meaning. Without meaning, there's little motivation. We want to know about certain order of things. We do not believe by nature that every order of things is equal to every other order of things. We say some orders are better than other orders. And the best orders are beautiful. And therefore, we like beautiful things. It's a creation of ours, and yet it is a reflection of our evolutionary heritage. Because life itself depends upon the finest order, and therefore we have an intuitive gravitation towards beauty. So where do we put the art in the school system? Well, it may be at the bottom of the rung. We are social creatures, therefore we are moral creatures. We are concerned about how we are related. And recently, the idea of equality has dawned upon humanity, and the idea of justice has come to dominate our concerns. Therefore, the curriculum of the future for our kids has got to be concerned with moral issues and justice and evil and altruism. Our definition of evil is anything that suppresses the actuality of potential. Altruism means that quality in human relationships, that permits and encourages the actualization of the other's potential. And we've noticed in looking at married couples, if they relate to each other in a way that they are drawing out each other's potentialities, it's a wonderful family, happy. If the husband and wife are constantly carping at one another and suppressing each other's potential, eventually